The sound of 20 forks hitting 20 plates at the exact same moment is something you never forget. It's the sound of a family holding its breath, of relatives who've been chatting and laughing, suddenly frozen like someone hit pause on their lives. That's the sound that filled my parents' dining room when my 7-year-old daughter Gracie stood up on her chair, her little finger pointed directly at my Aunt Helen, and spoke the words that would shatter our family's carefully maintained facade forever. Aunt Helen, should I tell everyone what you did with Grandma Josephine's medicine? But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why those 11 words from a second grader caused my aunt's face to drain of all color, why my cousin stopped mid-bite, and why my own mother gripped the tablecloth so hard her knuckles went white, you need to know who we all were in that moment. I'm Claire Dunmore, 34 years old, a dental hygienist who smells permanently like mint fluoride and hand sanitizer. Single mother to 2 kids who deserved better than the chaos their father left behind when he decided his secretary was more interesting than his family. The woman sitting at that Thanksgiving table with an empty plate in front of her because my aunt had just dumped my entire dinner in the trash while announcing that leeches don't eat at our table. My daughter Gracie sat to my right, all of 7 years old with dark curls that never stayed in their ribbons and eyes that noticed everything. She had this little pink notebook she carried everywhere, a gift from me to practice her spelling, though I'd learned that night she'd been using it for something entirely different. Her brother Tommy, 10 and trying so hard to be the man of our broken family, sat to my left with tears streaming down his cheeks as he watched our aunt humiliate me. The woman who'd just thrown away my food like I was some beggar who'd wandered in off the street was Helen Bradshaw, my father's older sister. 58 years old, never married, owner of 3 apartment buildings on the good side of town, and the self-appointed queen of our family. She wore her power like that expensive perfume she always doused herself in, making sure everyone could smell it from across the room. Every family gathering, she'd hold court at the head of the table, reminding us all who paid for the roof over my parents' heads, who'd covered my brother's wedding, who'd saved us all from financial ruin. My parents, Rita and Frank Dunmore, had been depending on Helen's money ever since Dad's roofing business went under 5 years ago. Mom, who used to stand up to anyone, now sat silent during Helen's cruel speeches. Dad, once the strongest man I knew, stared at his plate like a scolded child whenever his sister started her lectures about family disappointments. My younger brother Curtis was there too, with his wife Melanie, both of them practically glowing in Helen's presence. They'd learned early that agreeing with Helen meant extra Christmas cash and help with their mortgage. They laughed at her jokes about my failed marriage, nodded when she called me irresponsible, and tonight they'd actually applauded when she'd thrown away my food. Even my cousins were there, Rachel and Paul, my Aunt Dottie's kids. Dottie had passed 2 years ago, and they'd grown closer to Helen since then, drawn by the same financial magnetism that kept us all orbiting around her spite. Uncle Robert, Helen's younger brother, usually tried to keep the peace, but even he stayed quiet when Helen went on her tirades. And then there was Grandma Josephine, my mother's mother, 83 years old and confined to a wheelchair after her stroke last year. She needed heart medication 3 times a day, those little white pills that kept her alive. She'd been looking weaker lately, her doctor confused why the medication wasn't working like it should. We'd all been worried, but none of us had connected the dots that Gracie had apparently been connecting for months. The evening had started like every Thanksgiving at the Dunmore house. Helen arriving late to make an entrance, commenting on my old car in the driveway, asking loudly if I'd finally gotten a real job yet. The table groaning under Mom's cooking, the turkey golden and perfect, sweet potato casserole with extra marshmallows, just how the kids liked it, green beans that nobody would eat but tradition demanded. Everything changed when Uncle Robert made the mistake of congratulating me on my new apartment. Helen's rage had been swift and vicious, culminating in her dramatic display of throwing away my dinner while my children watched. The family had applauded her cruelty, and I'd sat there, humiliated and speechless, until my 7-year-old daughter decided she'd seen enough. Standing on that chair in her purple dress with the flowers she'd picked out herself, Gracie was about to reveal just how much she'd been watching and just how much our family's queen had to hide. I never wanted to go to that Thanksgiving dinner. That morning, I'd stood in my bathroom looking at the dark circles under my eyes, practicing fake smiles in the mirror while Gracie and Tommy ate breakfast in our cramped kitchen. 2 years of single motherhood had aged me 5 years, but it wasn't the exhaustion that made me dread family gatherings. It was knowing I'd become the family failure, the cautionary tale Helen would tell to younger cousins about what happens when you marry for love instead of sense. Working as a dental hygienist at Dr. Morrison's practice meant long days on my feet, helping nervous patients while maintaining perpetual cheerfulness. 60 hours a week of just a little pinch, and you're doing great while secretly calculating whether I had enough gas money to last until payday. The job barely covered rent and groceries, but it had flexible hours that let me race to school pickups and parent-teacher conferences, where teachers gently suggested Tommy might benefit from additional support we couldn't afford. My ex-husband Dennis had left us with $18,000 in credit card debt and a mortgage on a house we'd already lost. He'd been having an affair with his 23-year-old secretary while I was working double shifts to support his business ventures. The divorce papers had been his Valentine's Day gift to me, complete with a custody arrangement where he got the kids every other weekend until he moved to Phoenix and forgot they existed. "Why doesn't Daddy call anymore?" Tommy had asked 6 months ago, and I'd had to explain that sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense, even to themselves. My parents had stepped in immediately. Mom watched the kids every afternoon, Dad picked them up from school, and they never asked for a penny. But their help came at a price, just not one they charged. The bill collector was Helen, who made sure everyone knew she was the one actually paying for my childcare since she kept my parents afloat. Helen had been controlling our family's finances for so long that most of us had forgotten what independence felt like. When Dad's roofing business collapsed during the recession, Helen had swooped in like a savior, paying off their mortgage, covering their bills, keeping them in the house I'd grown up in. But every check came with commentary, every payment with a pound of flesh in the form of dignity. She'd done the same for Curtis when he wanted to marry Melanie. "That girl's too good for you," she'd said, writing a check for $20,000 for their dream wedding. "Don't embarrass the family." Now they attended every dinner, laughed at every cruel joke, and had learned to see me through Helen's eyes, the embarrassing older sister who couldn't keep her man or manage her money. The Bradshaw family had always had money, old commercial real estate investments that Helen had inherited and expanded. She lived alone in a 6-bedroom house she'd filled with expensive furniture no one was allowed to sit on. She collected people's debts like some collected stamps, carefully cataloging who owed her what and for how long. "You know how she is," Mom had said on the phone that morning. "Just ignore her comments. It's one dinner." But it was never just one dinner. It was birthday parties where Helen would loudly ask if I needed her to pay for the cake. Christmas mornings where she'd give my kids elaborate gifts while making sure everyone knew their mother couldn't afford anything similar. Easter brunches where she'd comment on my dress being the same one I'd worn last year. Grandma Josephine had been my only defender, the sole voice that would rise against Helen's tyranny. "Leave the girl alone," she'd say, her voice still strong despite her body's weakness. "She's doing her best." "Her best isn't good enough," Helen would reply, "and enabling mediocrity doesn't help anyone." But lately, even Grandma Josephine had been too tired to fight. The heart medication that was supposed to give her energy left her drained. Her doctor, Benjamin Brennan, had run every test, adjusted dosages, tried different brands, but nothing seemed to work. We'd all noticed her decline, the way she'd drift off during conversations, how her hands shook more, how she'd forgotten my birthday for the first time in my life. "Is great-grandma going to die?" Gracie had asked me 2 weeks ago, clutching that pink notebook I'd bought her at the dollar store. "Not if we can help it," I'd told her, having no idea she'd already been helping in ways none of us adults had imagined. As I'd loaded my kids into my 12-year-old Honda that Thanksgiving morning, watching other families head to their celebrations in newer cars with intact families, I'd made myself a promise. One more year of Helen's humiliation. Then I'd have enough saved to stop depending on my parents for childcare. One more year of swallowing my pride so my kids could have family dinners and cousins to play with. I didn't know that in just 3 hours my 7-year-old daughter would make that promise irrelevant by exposing the secret that would free us all. The trouble started with Uncle Robert's innocent smile and raised wine glass. He'd always been the softer of the two Bradshaw siblings, running a small accounting firm instead of building an empire like Helen. "Hey, Claire, heard the good news about your apartment application getting approved. Maple Street, right? That's a great neighborhood for the kids." I felt Helen's attention snap to me like a searchlight finding an escaped prisoner. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth, loaded with Mom's perfectly seasoned stuffing, and slowly lowered back to her plate. The entire table seemed to sense the shift in atmospheric pressure, conversations trailing off as everyone turned to watch what would happen next. "Approved?" Helen's voice had that dangerous quietness that preceded her worst outbursts. "What apartment? You're already living somewhere, aren't you?" "It's a 2-bedroom, I said, keeping my voice steady while my hands trembled under the table. "The kids are getting older. Tommy needs his own room now, and Gracie deserves a space that's actually hers, not just a corner behind a curtain." "With what money?" Each word came out sharp and distinct, like she was talking to someone very stupid. "You can barely afford gas for that embarrassment you call a car. I've seen you counting change at the grocery store." My mother tried to intervene, reaching across the table toward Helen. "Please, it's Thanksgiving. Let's just enjoy the meal together." "No, Rita." Helen pushed back from the table and stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that made everyone wince. "I'm tired of pretending this is normal. I'm tired of everyone dancing around the truth while I foot the bill for this entire family's failures." "Helen, that's enough," Uncle Robert said, but she whirled on him. "Is it? Is it enough, Robert? Because I don't see you paying for Mom and Dad's mortgage. I don't see you covering their medical bills, their groceries, their utilities." She turned back to me, her face flushed with years of resentment finally boiling over. "Do you know why your parents can babysit for free, Claire? Because I pay for their entire life. Every hour they spend watching your kids while you're at work is subsidized by my checkbook. That makes you nothing but a leech, living off my generosity while contributing absolutely nothing to this family." "I work 60 hours a week," I said, my voice shaking but louder than before. "I clean people's teeth until my hands go numb. I skip lunch to take extra patients. I haven't bought myself new shoes in 2 years. I'm not taking anything from you." "Aren't you?" Helen walked around the table toward my place setting, and everyone seemed to lean away as she passed. "Your childcare alone would cost you $1,500 a month minimum. Who provides that? Your parents? No, they provide it because I enable them to. Every meal your kids eat here, every night they sleep over, every birthday present from Grandma and Grandpa, it all comes from my pocket." She reached my place and picked up my full plate. The turkey Mom had carved specially for me, white meat because she knew I preferred it. The stuffing with extra sage, the way I'd loved it since childhood. The green beans Tommy had helped prepare, proud to contribute. The sweet potato casserole with marshmallows arranged in a heart shape by Gracie that afternoon. "What are you doing?" Dad finally spoke, half rising from his chair. "Something someone should have done years ago," Helen said, carrying my plate toward the kitchen, "teaching Claire that there's no such thing as a free meal." We all heard it, the foot pedal of the trash can, the slide of food off porcelain, every bite of my Thanksgiving dinner falling into the garbage with wet, humiliating thuds. She walked back, her heels clicking on the floor like a countdown to something worse, and placed the empty plate back in front of me with ceremonial precision. "Leeches don't eat at our table," she announced, looking around the room like she expected applause for her performance, and she got it. Curtis started first, his slow clap echoing in the stunned silence. "Finally," he said. Someone needed to say it. Melanie joined her husband, adding her manicured applause to his. "It's about time we stopped enabling this." Cousin Paul started clapping too, then Rachel, though she at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Even Uncle Robert gave a few weak claps before catching my mother's horrified expression and stopping. Tommy's face crumpled beside me, tears rolling down his cheeks as he watched his family applaud his mother's humiliation. "Mom?" he whispered, reaching for my hand. But it was Gracie who moved first. My quiet, observant daughter, who'd been uncharacteristically silent all evening, suddenly pushed back her chair and climbed up to stand on it, her patent leather shoes that we'd found at Goodwill gleaming under the dining room lights. "Aunt Helen," she said, her 7-year-old voice cutting through the applause like a blade through butter. Should I tell everyone what you did with Grandma Josephine's medicine?" The clapping stopped instantly. The room went so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, counting the seconds until our family would never be the same again. The silence that followed Gracie's question was absolute. Helen's face transformed from smug satisfaction to something I'd never seen before, pure, undiluted fear. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under spring sun. "What is she talking about?" Grandma Josephine leaned forward in her wheelchair, her voice stronger than it had been in months. The confusion in her eyes mixed with a growing alarm that seemed to energize her fragile frame. Gracie stood steadier on that chair than I'd ever seen her stand anywhere. She looked at me first, and in her eyes I saw something that took my breath away. This wasn't a child making up stories or repeating something she'd overheard. This was my daughter, who'd been watching, documenting, and waiting for exactly the right moment to protect the family that Helen was destroying. "Gracie, honey, what are you saying?" I started to stand, unsure whether to pull her down or let her continue. "No, Mommy." She shook her head, her curls bouncing with determination. "She's mean to you because she thinks nobody sees what she does. But I see everything. I'm little, so people forget I'm there. They do things when I'm in the room because they think I'm just playing with my dolls or coloring. But I'm not just playing. I'm watching." Helen attempted a laugh that came out high and strangled. "Children and their imaginations. You know how kids make up stories for attention. It's not a story." Gracie pulled her pink notebook from her dress pocket, the one with unicorn stickers on the cover that she carried everywhere. The same notebook I thought she used for practicing her letters. "I write everything down, just like Mrs. Patterson taught us in school. She said good scientists keep observation journals, so I keep one about our family." Curtis stood up, his earlier smugness replaced with uncertainty. "This is ridiculous. She's 7 years old. We're going to listen to a second grader's fantasies?" But Gracie was already opening her notebook, her small fingers finding a page marked with a yellow sticky note. October 15th, 3:30 p.m. Aunt Helen came to visit Grandma Josephine while Mommy was at work. Grandma was taking her nap. Aunt Helen went to the medicine table and opened the white bottle with the red cap. She took out the little pills and put them in her purse. Then, she got different pills from her bag, white ones from a vitamin bottle, and put them in Grandma's medicine bottle instead. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once, but Grandma Josephine's voice cut through the chaos. "My heart medication. Dr. Brennan couldn't understand why it wasn't working. I've been feeling so weak, so tired." "This is insane." Helen's voice had gone shrill. "You're going to believe a child's made-up story? She probably saw me helping Mother with her pills and misunderstood." "I have more." Gracie flipped through pages covered in her careful, wobbly handwriting. September 22nd, 4:15 p.m. Aunt Helen went through Grandpa Frank's desk when everyone was in the kitchen. She found an envelope from Uncle Mitchell in Colorado and took it. It had a check inside. I saw her put it in her purse. Dad's face went white. "Mitchell sent me a check for my birthday. Helen, you told me it must have gotten lost in the mail." November 1st, 2:20 p.m., Gracie continued, her voice gaining confidence with each revelation. Aunt Helen was on the phone in the bathroom. She didn't know I was in the hallway. She told someone named Barbara at the bank to freeze Mommy's account. She said she was the emergency contact and that Mommy was unstable and couldn't be trusted with money. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's why my debit card was declined last week. The bank said there was a security hold they couldn't explain. Uncle Robert moved closer to Helen, his expression dark. "What else, Gracie? What else did you see?" Gracie looked down at her notebook, then back up at the room full of adults hanging on every word from a 7-year-old. October 29th, 5 p.m. Aunt Helen was talking to someone on the phone about Grandma Josephine's will. She said she needed more time before the changes were final. She said the old lady was tougher than expected, but wouldn't last much longer if things went according to plan. "You little brat!" Helen lunged toward Gracie, her mask completely shattered, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. I moved faster than I'd ever moved in my life, stepping between my daughter and my aunt, my hands steady for the first time all evening. touch my daughter, and I'll call the police right now. In fact, maybe I should anyway. Tampering with someone's medication isn't just theft, Helen. It's attempted murder." "I have pictures, too," Gracie added softly, holding up my old phone, the one I let her play games on when she'd been good. "This phone takes pictures even when the screen is black. I learned that by accident. I've been taking pictures of everything just in case my notebook wasn't enough. Mrs. Patterson says good scientists always need backup documentation." The dining room that had moments ago been filled with applause for my humiliation now looked like a courtroom where the verdict had just been delivered. Helen stood exposed, her carefully constructed image of the family benefactor revealed as a mask for something much darker. Uncle Robert grabbed Helen's wrist as she tried to lunge toward Gracie again, his accountant's mind already calculating the implications of what we'd just heard. "The pills, Helen. Tell me you didn't actually switch Mom's heart medication." Helen's composure finally shattered completely. Her perfectly styled hair had come loose, lipstick smeared from where she'd been biting her lip, and her eyes had the wild look of a cornered animal. "You don't understand. None of you understand what I've sacrificed." "Sacrificed?" Grandma Josephine's voice was stronger than it had been in months, fueled by rage and betrayal. "You tried to kill me." "I wasn't trying to kill you," Helen screamed, tears now streaming down her face, creating dark mascara rivers on her cheeks. "I just needed you weak enough not to change the will. Do you have any idea what it's like watching you all take and take and take while planning to give everything to her?" She pointed at me with a shaking finger. "The family failure who can't even keep a husband interested." "You changed Grandma's will?" My mother stood up, her hands flat on the table, the woman who'd been silent for years finally finding her voice. "Mother, is this true?" Grandma Josephine nodded slowly. 3 months ago, I met with my lawyer to leave the house to Claire and the children. She's the only one who visits me because she loves me, not because she wants something. Every Sunday, rain or shine, she brings those babies to see me. She reads to me, helps me with my exercises, actually listens when I talk about my childhood. The rest of you only show up when you need something. That house is worth $800,000. Curtis slammed his hand on the table, making dishes jump. "You were going to give it to Claire? After everything Aunt Helen has done for this family?" "Everything she's done?" Grandma Josephine laughed bitterly. "You mean holding it over your heads? Making you dance for scraps? Turning you into puppets who applaud when she throws your sister's food in the garbage?" Gracie was still standing on her chair, my brave little girl who'd orchestrated this entire revelation. She flipped to another page in her notebook. There's more. October 8th, Aunt Helen was in Grandma's room going through her jewelry box. She took the ruby ring, the one with the gold band. She said on the phone later that Grandma was getting too old to notice things going missing. "My mother's ring," Grandma Josephine gasped. "You told me I must have misplaced it." "November 12th, Gracie continued, her voice clear and devastating. "Aunt Helen met with someone named Mr. Crawford at the coffee shop on Main Street. I was there with Mommy getting hot chocolate. She gave him papers and said once Grandma was gone, she'd have power of attorney over Grandpa Frank and Grandma Rita, too. She said old people were easy to control if you knew which. Medications to adjust. My father stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "You were planning to do this to us, too?" Helen's face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. "It's not like that. I take care of everyone. I deserve to be compensated. I've spent my entire life cleaning up after all of your failures." "No," Uncle Robert said, pulling out his phone. "You've spent your life making us feel like failures so we'd never question your control. I'm calling the police." "Wait!" Helen tried to grab his phone, but he stepped away. "We're family. You can't do this to family." "Family?" I found myself laughing, but it wasn't a happy sound. Family doesn't poison grandmothers. Family doesn't steal medicine from elderly women. Family doesn't throw away someone's dinner in front of their children while demanding applause for the cruelty. Tommy had stopped crying and was staring at his little sister with something like awe. "Gracie, how long have you been watching her?" "Since my birthday," Gracie said simply. "She made Mommy cry at my birthday party. Said the cake from the grocery store was pathetic and that Mommy couldn't even give me a proper party. I decided then that bullies always have secrets. Mommy taught me that about the mean girl at school. She said people who are mean to others are usually hiding something bad about themselves. The sirens were already audible in the distance. Uncle Robert had placed the call while we were all staring at Gracie. Helen must have heard them too because she suddenly made a break for the door, but Curtis, of all people, blocked her path. "No," he said quietly. "You're going to face this. All those years you made us feel worthless, made us compete for your approval, made us turn on each other. It ends tonight." Helen collapsed into a chair, sobbing, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught, exposed and defeated by a 7-year-old with a pink notebook and an old phone that could take pictures in the dark. When the police arrived, Gracie climbed down from her chair and walked over to Grandma Josephine. "I'm sorry I didn't tell sooner," she whispered. "I wanted to make sure I had enough proof. Mrs. Patterson says good scientists wait until they have all their data." Grandma Josephine pulled her into a fierce hug. "You saved my life, sweet girl. You saved all of us." The rest of that Thanksgiving dinner happened in a blur of police statements, evidence bags, and Helen being led away in handcuffs while the entire neighborhood watched from their windows. She'd stopped crying by then, her face set in a hard mask of resentment, still somehow believing she was the victim in all of this. The officers carefully bagged Gracie's notebook and my old phone as evidence, but not before making copies of everything for the investigation. The forensic team arrived within hours to test Grandma Josephine's medication. The pills Helen had substituted were basic calcium. Supplements harmless but completely useless for a heart condition. Grandma Josephine could have died any day, her heart failing while we all wondered why her medication wasn't working. Dr. Brennan later told us she was lucky to have survived the 3 months of substituted pills. Helen was charged with attempted murder, elder abuse, grand theft, and fraud. The investigation revealed she'd stolen over $200,000 from various family members over the years, always small enough amounts that no one would notice, always with access she'd gained through being the helpful sister and daughter. The apartment buildings she'd lorded over us, purchased with money she'd stolen from our grandmother's investment accounts, but the real aftermath came in the weeks that followed, as our family had to rebuild without Helen's money, and more importantly, without her poison. Dad went back to work, starting a small handyman service that grew quickly because he was good at what he did when he wasn't being told he was a failure. Mom started selling her quilts online, something Helen had always mocked as a cute little hobby. Within 6 months, she had orders from 3 states. Curtis and Melanie had to face who they'd become under Helen's influence. The night after Helen's arrest, Curtis came to my apartment with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry for applauding when she hurt you. I'd become someone I don't even recognize." It took time, but we rebuilt our relationship, and he became the brother I'd once had before Helen turned us against each other. Uncle Robert discovered Helen had been stealing from his business accounts too, small transfers he'd attributed to accounting errors. He used the recovered funds to expand his firm, and he hired me as his office manager, a job with regular hours, benefits, and respect. 3 weeks after that Thanksgiving, Gracie and I were baking cookies in our new apartment on Maple Street, the one that had started the whole confrontation. Grandma Josephine had given us the down payment from her recovered funds, insisting it was the least she could do for the child who'd saved her life. "Mommy, are you mad I kept secrets?" Gracie asked, decorating a sugar cookie with careful precision. I knelt down to her level, looking into those observant eyes that had seen so much. "Baby, you were protecting our family, but I need to ask you something. How did you know to watch Aunt Helen so carefully?" She smiled, getting flour on her nose as she touched her face. "You taught me, Mommy. Remember when Susie at school was being mean to everyone? You said bullies hurt others because they're hiding something that makes them feel bad about themselves. You said to watch what they do when they think no one's looking, because that's when they show who they really are. So I watched Aunt Helen when she thought no one was looking. But the pictures, the documentation, how did you know to do all that?" Mrs. Patterson taught us about the scientific method. She said observations need evidence, and on TV the detectives always need proof. I knew grown-ups wouldn't believe a kid unless I had proof. I held her tight. This 7-year-old who'd saved her great-grandmother's life and freed our entire family from years of emotional and financial abuse. That Thanksgiving, I'd walked into my parents' house feeling like a failure, a single mother who couldn't provide, who needed charity to survive. But my daughter showed me that strength isn't about money or status. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're small, even when everyone tells you to be quiet and grateful for scraps. Grandma Josephine lived another 8 wonderful years after that night. She did leave us the house, but more importantly, she lived to see Gracie graduate high school as valedictorian, go to college on a full scholarship to study criminal justice, and eventually become a prosecutor specializing in elder abuse cases. Helen served 5 years in prison and was released on probation. She lost everything: the properties, the money, the power, and most of all, the family she'd tried to control. We heard she moved to another state to live with a distant cousin, but none of us ever spoke to her again. Every Thanksgiving now, when our family gathers, we tell this story to the younger cousins, the next generation who need to know that abuse doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it wears expensive perfume and writes checks. Sometimes it comes with a smile and an offer to help. But it always, always thrives in silence. And when we raise our glasses for the toast, we toast to Gracie, the 7-year-old who reminded us that heroes don't need to be big or powerful. Sometimes they're just brave enough to stand on a chair and speak the truth when it matters most. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear that standing up to bullies is always worth it, no matter how powerful they seem. Comment below if you've ever had a Gracie in your life who saw what others missed. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when it matters most.